Welcome back, everybody, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. The title of today's podcast episode is Divorce is a New Awakening. I choose titles to podcasts a lot of times based on conversations that I have in the office or themes that I see occurring among different people calling and going through their divorce mediation and their divorce settlement agreements. So I wanted to focus on something that I'm hearing back from a lot of men and something else that I'm hearing back from a lot of women. So let's just start with, in divorce, your whole life changes. It changes for the better, hopefully, at least in the long run, if not slowly in the short run. But at major league, changes financially and sometimes professionally. Sometimes we have to make different choices in what we do for a living if what we're making can't handle our family obligations, especially if there are children and there's a lot of debt. Those two things really come into play with men especially. So your life is going through huge turmoil. You're not only dealing with the emotion of getting divorced, but now you're dealing with the financial aspect of getting divorced. And I've heard this phrase from several men lately, and the phrase is, I feel like I'm leaving the divorce with nothing. So for me, I've done this long enough to know that that means I either haven't developed my career enough and I let my wife support the family, or there's a lot of asset values that are my wife's through inheritance, or I don't really understand anything about community property law. I have no clue what there is to divide, but mostly, I really think it comes down to this. I'm not emotionally ready. I'm not philosophically ready, and I'm scared to death. So let's go through a few things that we can deal with that are easy to help men not be afraid. First of all, when I feel like I'm leaving the divorce with nothing, I say, well, wait a minute. I haven't received your disclosures yet, but please bear in mind, California is a community property state. So anything that you have that falls under the community property law is divided in half. And the division of community property is designed to equalize the marital assets so that no one leaves with nothing and the other one takes everything. So that's one thing that any of you men who might be listening to the podcast now, please know that you could easily have assets that will be divided, whether it's a family business, a house, pension plans, money in the bank account. On the date of separation, it's community property. Any other financial investments, the only thing that you cannot divide is separate property. So here's another thing that comes into play, though, with this community property law. Have you signed the deed to the house over to your wife or spouse, thereby relinquishing your largest asset? This happens more than people would think. Well, if that's the case, why? There could be a very good reason why you did that. Nothing that you should really question. But that's not coming through when I hear men say, I feel like I'm leaving the divorce with nothing. Or I feel like I'm leaving the marriage with nothing. That doesn't really come through because it's really mostly emotion and fear that's coming through. So I just want to quantify this the way it needs to be quantified so that your emotions can relax and you know that whatever's available as community property will be available. But if you signed the house over to your wife, you're the husband, there is a reason why. Is it that you're going to be inheriting property from one of your parents soon? Therefore, you wanted the wife to have the house you're living in? Did your wife buy the house with separate property money? Is your wife supporting the house for the most part, and you feel that she should have it? Is there any financial malfeasance that you engaged in? Was there any drug addiction? What did you do possibly that caused the marriage to end, and therefore this was your way of atoning? And if this was your way of atoning, congratulations. I mean, you just did a really huge thing if you felt that this would equalize the pain that maybe you caused the marriage. And if you didn't, that's great too. So there's a reason why you signed the house over. Or, sorry about that. So sort out the responsibility. Sort out why, if the biggest asset you have you gave to your wife, sort out why. And leave it alone. You did a great thing. More than likely, you did a wonderful thing, and congratulate yourself for that. Next, I have a job that I like and make money. It's just less than my wife's salary. That's one of the other issues when men say, I feel like I'm leaving the marriage with nothing. Well, it's really tough in this day and age when men make less than women and women are now making more than men. Ego kicks in. But you need to keep focused, gentlemen, on the value that your work brings humanity. Because if it does, who cares what you make? Focus on that wonderful thing that you do. For instance, teaching is one of the highest skills you could have, one of the best jobs you could have, but teaching doesn't pay as much as working in finance or selling product that's a very high-end product, and maybe your wife does that. You can't worry about that. You really can't. It's one of the hardest things to deal with, and you can't worry about it. You can only focus on your skills and talents and what you're doing to contribute to the health and welfare of humanity. But use divorce as an impetus to raise your income level if possible. For instance, let's use the example I just gave you of teaching. So if you're a teacher, can you aspire to be a principal? If you're a teacher, can you start other programs that outside of the 9 to 3 or 9 to 4 job can make you additional income? So look beyond what you're doing and see if you can bump up what you're making. But if you love what you do, do it. Don't change what you do. And don't make that take away the value that your work brings to humanity. Here's another issue. I worked in my wife's business and now I can't because we're getting divorced. So I'm leaving the marriage with no job and no income. Okay, response to that. Well, there's always spousal support and the division of assets. Let's never forget that if you make less, spousal support is not gender specific. It's income specific. And don't be embarrassed to ask for spousal support. Or don't leave the house until you have a job that can support you living on your own and support all the other financial obligations that you have. Take your time, talk to your wife. Make sure that the transition going from a one home, one family household is an easier financial transition when you go into 2 households. Make that a more clarified decision and work on a timeline together so that you don't bury yourself financially by moving out. Ask yourself this question. Did your wife want you to work in the family business? Or was this a way of avoiding a job? Sometimes we're just stuck. Sometimes we really don't know what we want to do. And if our wife has a business, then we want to work in that business. Or we're proud that our wife has a business and we want to help in that business. If it takes time away from you growing in your own career, then just use divorce as a new awakening. Just use this as an opportunity to correct it. Don't beat yourself up. We're all human. We all do what we think is best at any point in time. And so we need significant changes in our lives to change our direction. Use divorce to do that. And there are instances where both spouses legitimately work the family business, and they either continue to do so or they both negotiate a buyout of the other. So that's always an opportunity that you have. Another thing I hear, I haven't invested like my wife has. Well, that's okay. Not everyone has the same ability to make money grow. We really don't. Use whatever you receive from the divorce and hire somebody to invest that money for you. This way, you're using divorce as a new awakening and you're learning and growing from it. Okay, so listen. I wish I was as good as other people and people I'm related to be able to grow money. I'm not that person. It's really a challenge for me. I have to really focus on how I spend money on a daily basis. I have to really focus on saving money. It's just not easy for me. So just accept that this may be a challenge for you. It doesn't make you a horrible person. You're a fine person. Just use the divorce as an impetus to learn and grow as a financial entity. Or, this is a tough one, this next one. My wife inherited a lot of money. Okay, it's separate property, folks, and I didn't. Well, wish your wife well. God bless her that she inherited money. Not everybody has parents who can do that for their children. But don't compare yourself solely in financial terms. There are so many more aspects of our humanness that have value. Kindness, charity, openness to helping people, or choosing a career that serves mankind. Having a sense of humor, that makes people feel good. It is so easy to compare ourselves financially to our mates and to other people, but that's a surefire way of keeping you completely depressed and keeping you stuck in a negative pattern. Don't do it. Focus on moving forward. That's the goal here. Focus on moving forward. I'm embarrassed to ask, and lastly, I'm embarrassed to ask my wife for spousal support. And we have children, so I don't want to rock the co-parenting boat, or she'll make things ugly if I do. No. If you need spousal support, you need spousal support. You don't have to take it for the rest of your life. Depending on how long you're married, it may not even be available to you for the rest of your life. But you can negotiate it for a short term. I know it's hard. Believe me, I know it's hard. There have only been a couple men that I've dealt with in mediation who asked for spousal support and had really good reasons for it. And their reasons were, well, listen, wife, while you were out working far more than 8 to 10 hours a day because you were really gung-ho on a career and you were on a career path where you could have a lot more promotions and movement forward, I stayed home and watched the kids. I kept the house together. I made sure our social engagements were calendared. And that was a really legitimate response to spousal support other than I'm allowed to ask for it, so I am. Those were really good reasons. And the other gentleman who asked for it so that he could transition better, set another household up for himself, and put a limited time frame on it. This is truly one of the hardest discussions that we have in mediation, when the male earns less than the female. Women are slowly accepting their roles as higher income earners, and they are going to, it's going to be a reverse spousal support situation where they pay the men, They understand their obligations, and slowly I see women willing to meet those obligations. Now, I will give a little aside here. It was a millennial recently who said that. She was absolutely ready to pay spousal support. She got it, she understood it, and let's go. It's my responsibility, I'm going to do it. So men, I know it's hard. Nobody wants to be the lower wage earner, definitely not men, but just use the divorce as a way of turning everything around in a positive way. It can be done. And if you need any help, if you need any encouragement, you know you can always contact me, and I'm happy to do that for you, because I don't want anybody to feel less than their wives. I just don't want you to do that. You're good people. We do the best we can. And so let's move forward and deal with money and finance, the division of assets, spousal support in the best way possible, and then build from there. Now, women, let's focus on you. So here's a theme that I still hear from women. I have no idea what our assets are. And how am I going to know that I'm getting my fair share? Well, that's really easy to answer. We have disclosure forms for that. So let's start with that. Part of the divorce filing are disclosure forms. One is about assets and debts. One is about income and expense. Everybody has to do them. This informs both spouses of their assets and debts so that you can know what you have to divide. So just the catch-all phrase, anything purchased or acquired from the monies that both spouses made during the marriage, from date of marriage to date of separation, is community property. And that will come out on the disclosure exchange. So there is paperwork that will unfold and make you aware of anything that's community property. Something else. Women say, my husband never shared the income tax returns with me, or he just gave me the page that I'm supposed to sign. I signed it, and I never really read anything through. But here's part 2 of that. I never asked either. Most women don't ask because that's what their assigned roles are. Husband takes care of the money, wife takes care of the family. It's normal, and that's okay. Do not beat yourself up if you haven't read through the income tax reports. Most people don't if they're not the ones meeting with the accountant and preparing them. But you can ask for them now as part of the disclosure exchange. Or if your family had an accountant do the income tax reports, call the accountant. If you signed the forms, you're able to get a copy of them. But this all comes out in what we call the disclosure exchange portion of the filing. Here's something else I hear women say. I never really cared or asked about our investments, so now what do I do about negotiating a settlement? Well, it is time to care. It's time to care because it's money, and it's the way we function in life. We need money. So this is used as an awakening that both spouses should be aware of their assets and debts. So right now, anybody listening to this who has not filed, just start becoming aware of what's going on. If bills come to the house, open them up and look at them. They're your bills. You're both responsible for debt. You're both responsible for assets. So there's nothing wrong, and sit down with your spouse and talk about them so that you can be educated and become aware. And see an attorney for legal advice. Okay, no, I can't think of the word I want to say. There's nothing wrong with asking for legal advice. You're not doing anything wrong by asking an attorney. You need to be educated. Your husband needs to be educated too. Everybody needs to be educated. But figure out why you didn't care and ask yourself how important your settlement is to you now. There are still women who are letting their soon-to-be ex-spouses give them what they think is fair, and not what actually is available to them as their share of spousal support and assets. It's really hard to change behavior. It's so hard to change behavior that even when women know that spousal support is available to them, and by the way, there's a calculator available in California called the Disomaster. It is a calculator designed to calculate spousal support based on a lot of different line items. And spousal support is available to equalize the standard of living moving forward. So ask for spousal support. Let some third neutral party or an attorney come in and run it for you. It's not going to cripple the payor. It's never going to take more than half. It's really designed to even out the standard of living so that one person isn't leaving the marriage without anything and the other person is leaving the marriage with everything. But figure out why you didn't care. Figure out why this wasn't important. I think thinking about money can be a burden a lot of times, but it's also freedom. When you know how to operate within money, it's a very freeing feeling. And making your own money is wonderful. Except when you don't have to, then that's really fabulous. But making your own money is always good, and it's always freedom. And you can decide not to accept half the value of assets. That's your decision. There are people who do that. Again, do you feel guilty that you were the one that ended the marriage? Is this your way of compensating your husband? Well, if it is, then that's fine. You know, we have this thing called divorce law, and it tries to equalize assets and debts. But then you have this thing called the emotions of the marriage and the behavior in the marriage. And a lot of times people feel guilty if they've contributed to the downfall of the marriage. And when they've contributed, their way of paying their spouse back is not asking for an equal distribution of assets. And so women, if that's what you feel you would like to do to show consideration to your husband, do it. Don't let anybody talk you out of it. Do what you think is right. But if half the assets are available to you and you want to avail yourself of it, you've got divorce law to support you. Oh, I know the word I wasn't thinking of when I said going to a lawyer. You're not being a traitor by going to a lawyer. Sorry about that. That word just wasn't coming out of my head. People think that they're traitors, that they're doing something behind their spouse's back by seeing a lawyer. And I say, no. You go see a lawyer, you encourage your spouse to see a lawyer. Take an hour and just ask all the questions you need to ask. Believe me, being educated is so much better than not being educated. And then do what you want. In terms, if you want to give things away that you don't have to, give them away. Do what you want to do. Do what you think is right. Women, so to prepare to move out and to prepare, to live separately, make sure you figure out a realistic budget in advance so that your conversation about spousal support is a number that makes sense in terms of what your husband makes and what you need to live on. So I've seen women who feel very beholden to their husbands. Maybe they've contributed to the divorce. Maybe there's been a lot of financial malfeasance or a lot of behavioral malfeasance. Maybe there's been substance abuse on the woman's side. And I see women not wanting to take what the law affords them. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. But as you're moving out, you have to look at a budget that's realistic. And so when you go to negotiate spousal support, make sure you're covering yourself. And even if you don't want to take all the spousal support available, make sure you're taking what you need so you can pay your bills and not fall down the rabbit's hole of debt. Something else I hear from women: I'm afraid to ask for what he makes or what we have in assets because he gets so mad when I question him. Okay, so this is now time to involve neutral third parties. So if you book a mediation, the mediator, as a neutral, will ask the questions necessary to help you with a settlement. They will just normally ask about the assets and debts in the family and income because that's what we're supposed to ask. That's what a mediator does. And so when you get a neutral third person simply doing what they're supposed to do, now the reality of what the assets and debts are and what the income of the husband is, it comes forward. And again, don't forget those disclosure forms. They're designed for all of that. Or again, see a lawyer who will work out spousal support based on the state calculator. In California, it's called the DissoMaster, and show you what spousal support looks like. And your attorney will also question you about whatever you know your assets to be and your debts to be, and we'll start separating that for you. Or once you do your disclosure form. So this is important, and this is what I tell people all the time. If you want to see a lawyer before you even start the filing, just to see what legal rights are, that's great to do. But once the filing starts, if you go to a third party like a document preparation company, anybody that you see for divorce, we have these disclosure forms that we have to give you. And so after you fill out the one about assets and debts, once you fill out the one about income and expense, go back to the attorney, and then you can ask for legal advice on what the division of assets and debts are. Then you can go back to the mediator and negotiate a settlement. And then lastly, this is so important, especially if women don't feel like they had a voice in the marriage. This is what I hear: I need somebody to speak for me. Well, you do. If you never felt like you had a voice in the marriage, if income wasn't shared, if bank accounts weren't shared, if any investments or debt created wasn't shared, then you really do have to hire an attorney who will speak for you. That's what attorneys are for. They're there to speak for you. They're there to negotiate for you. You do have to lead the negotiation with your attorney. Your attorney can only make decisions that you want your attorney to make. Or you hire a mediator who will look for a compromise while doing an appropriate division of assets and debts for both of you. That's what mediators do. They look at your disclosure forms, and they look at what you have as community property, community assets, and they look at what you have as community debt, and then they go through everything with you. And they start putting charts together so that everybody can see what's available for distribution. And then you can respond whether you want to use an even distribution of assets and debts or an uneven distribution. And you can do the same with spousal support. So when you use divorce as an awakening to start speaking for yourself, you're using it properly, because that's what it is. So that's great that you will be hiring an attorney to teach you your what you can legally have, what your legal rights are, and you hire a mediator to help you and your husband or spouse work through the division of assets and debts, child support, spousal support, all of that good stuff. But even in the mediation, it'll teach you to start speaking for yourself, and you have the buffer of the mediator to do that. And that's how you can use divorce as an awakening, to start redirecting yourself to be a much more wholly sufficient person so that you can go anywhere and speak for yourself. Because I guarantee you, ladies, if you find it hard speaking for yourself in the marriage, I bet you have a hard time speaking for yourself in other areas of life, maybe in your job, maybe within your friendships, maybe with your parents and siblings. It can't just be in the marriage. It more than likely is just some aspect of your personality that you have to work through, possibly with a therapist. But use the divorce as an awakening to do that. So I hope I've given both men and women some tools to think about in these very specific situations of a husband feeling like he's leaving with nothing, and a wife feeling like she's in the dark and doesn't know how to function and move ahead. These are all solvable issues, and we'll discuss more in more upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Judy Weigel, your host with Constructive Uncoupling. If you would like to contact me in any way for maybe ideas on new podcast episodes, I can be reached at Judy, Judy, at constructiveuncoupling.com. Or you can reach me through my business, Divorce Resource Incorporated in Los Angeles. I'm on the internet, Judy at divorceresourceinc.com, if you want to do any mediation or filing. Thank you so very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to speaking to you next episode.